Friends, welcome to this lecture on Agile and Scrum. In this lecture, we will cover all about Agile software development methodology. Agile software development methodology is a popular, powerful, and effective methodology. Agile methodology has got its own philosophy and manifesto. The Agile philosophy and manifesto is implemented in detail in several variations of Agile. Scrum is one such variation. Friends, this is a packed video on Agile and Scrum. In less than an hour, we will cover what is Agile, review of SDLC and waterfall model, comparison of Agile and waterfall methodology, Agile philosophy and Agile manifesto, what is Scrum, origin of Scrum, what is a Scrum charter, Scrum ceremonies, which are sprint planning, sprint review, sprint retrospective, and daily Scrum, Scrum roles, which are development team, product owner, and the Scrum Master, Scrum artifacts like product backlog, sprint backlog, etc. We will learn what is a user story and how do we write a user story. We will cover an agile task board and how estimation is done on Scrum projects. We will also learn how to calculate velocity of a given sprint. Finally, we will conclude this session with a summary. What is Agile? Let me first answer the question, what is Agile? Friends, Agile is a popular software development methodology of current times. Prior to utilization of Agile methodology, waterfall method was used for developing software projects. As opposed to waterfall method, Agile projects are delivered in multiple releases. In waterfall method, the software was delivered in a single release. Friends, before I take you to the depths of Agile methodology and Scrum, let us review what is software development lifecycle and what we called as the traditional waterfall software development methodology. Friends, allow me to briefly mention phases of a software development project. We also call these phases as software development lifecycle phases. These phases are analysis, design, development, testing, and implementation. These phases are independent of the software development methodology being utilized for the given project. You can learn in detail about software development lifecycle phases in our lecture on software development lifecycle. In waterfall methodology, analysis, design, development, testing, and implementation phases are taken up only once for a project. This means there is little or no scope of revising the requirements after their finalization. These requirement changes can be looked into only after the full delivery of the project. This is an inflexible approach and has become outdated in a fast-changing world full of ambiguity and complexity. One question may come to your mind, why do we call this methodology as waterfall model? This is called so because of the fact, just as in case of a waterfall, if the water moves from a higher elevation to a lower elevation, cannot return back. Similarly, there is no scope or revision of analysis or design or development once that phase is complete. Let's focus on the word agile. Agile means quick and well coordinated movement. I also checked the dictionary for synonyms of agile. They are nimble, supple, lithe, sprightly, alert, responsive, swift, and active. So we can infer that with respect to software projects, agile methodology is all about being quick and responsive to the needs of the customer. This is true even when we encounter changing requirements during the later stages of the project. Agile is an iterative methodology where the software is delivered to the client in multiple releases or iterations. After every iteration, the customer receives a piece of a working software with additional features. Here, we will compare Agile software development methodology vis-a-vis Waterfall software development methodology. We have listed several attributes like working software delivery, contract negotiation, project documentation, etc., against which we will compare Agile methodology and Waterfall methodology. To start with, the working software is delivered in Agile methodology in multiple releases, whereas in Waterfall methodology, there is one single release at the end of the project. When it comes to contract negotiation, Agile calls for flexible contract negotiation, whereas in Waterfall methodology, the contract negotiation is rigid. Project documentation is always practical to meet the requirements of the project in Agile methodology, whereas we have elaborate project documentation when it comes to a waterfall project. Vision of the project or project vision. Vision of the project in Agile methodology is established prior to start. Same is true for waterfall methodology as well. Communication with the customer. When it comes to Agile, Agile calls for close and interpersonal communication with the customer. In comparison to Agile, the communication between the customer and the development team is distant and formal when it comes to a waterfall project. Requirements. As far as the project requirements are concerned, the requirements of the project are flexible and open to change. When it comes to waterfall, the requirements have to be within a scope and they are rigid once they are documented. Change control procedure. Change is documented but is welcome. In waterfall, the change control is elaborate and relatively inflexible. Now, when you are aware between the difference of waterfall software development methodology and agile software development methodology, it is time for me to take you to the origin of this difference. The actions on an IT project following agile methodology are inspired by agile philosophy. Agile philosophy has got 4 points. It says that individuals and interactions are to be given preference over processes and tools. Working software is given preference over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration is given preference over contract negotiation. Responding to change is given preference over following a plan. Now, you may think that agile philosophy is fine, but how do we ensure that this philosophy is translated into action on a project? For this, there is something what we call as Agile Manifesto. In the coming slide, we will learn more about the Agile Manifesto. Agile Manifesto. There are 12 principles which underlie the Agile Manifesto. They are: number one, customer satisfaction by rapid delivery of useful software. Number two, welcome changing requirements even late in development. Number three, working software is delivered frequently in weeks rather than months. Number four, working software is the principal measure of progress. Number five, sustainable development able to maintain a constant pace. Number six, close daily cooperation between business people and developers. Number seven, face-to-face conversation is the best form of communication, that is, co-located teams. Number eight, projects are built around motivated individuals who should be trusted. Number nine, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. Number 10, simplicity. Number 11, self-organizing teams. Number 12, regular adaptation to changing circumstances. That's fine. How do I enforce Agile Philosophy and Agile Manifesto? This question was asked to me by one of the participants in one workshop. You see, Agile Philosophy and Agile Manifesto is implemented by several Agile methodologies. They provide an elaborate set of action points to achieve the Agile philosophy. Let's get acquainted with their names. As told, Agile Philosophy and Agile Manifesto can be implemented on an IT project via several Agile methodologies. They are Scrum, Extreme Programming, Kanban, Adaptive Development, and DSTM. All the above methodologies specify elaborate activities to Agile philosophy. We can call them as rituals. Now let's learn about Scrum. Scrum is a popular software development methodology based on Agile philosophy and Agile Manifesto. On every Scrum project, there are defined roles for the development team, product owner, and the Scrum Master. We have defined events which are called as ceremonies. For example, one such ceremony is a daily Scrum. We have defined artifacts in Scrum, examples of which are product backlog, sprint backlog, etc. As we learn about Scrum in detail, we will be learning about these terms as well. Scrum. Has this word anything to do with the game of rugby? Yes, you are right. If this has come to your mind, Scrum is the huddle which happens in rugby. Similarly, the development team on an agile project huddles together every day to review the project progress and to remove obstacles in a shared manner. All this is facilitated by a Scrum Master. Before we dive deep into specific details of Scrum software development methodology, let us learn a little about origin and inspiration for Scrum. The origin and inspiration of Scrum can be traced to a Harvard Business Review article published in January 1986. The name of this article was, and I quote, "The New Product Development Game," unquote. This article was authored by Takakuchi and Nonaka. This article talks about how product development teams are taking positive cues from the game of rugby. This article also talks about self-organizing teams and overlapping product development. Starting a Scrum project. A Scrum project starts with the preparation of project charter. A Scrum project charter is shared vision or thinking at the time of start of the project. The Scrum project vision or charter can change with time. The Scrum project vision or charter also talks about the broad success criteria of the project. As we know that Scrum is an iterative methodology, so the software is delivered to the client in multiple releases. For this, a Scrum project is divided into multiple sprints. After every sprint, working software with additional functionality is released to the client. Software bugs or defects which would have crept in earlier releases may also be rectified in the subsequent sprint. Let's focus on the word sprint. As the word sprint is slightly new to the world of information technology, let's put that in context. A sprint is a short race full of energy and speed. It is a short dash. So for Scrum projects, a sprint is a short period after which a release happens. What is a sprint in a Scrum? Let us elaborate further about a sprint on a Scrum project. At the cost of repetition, a sprint in a Scrum project is an iteration which leads to a new release of software being developed. A typical sprint will last from 4 to 6 weeks. After every sprint, working software with additional functionality or features is delivered to the customer. The number of features or stories covered in a sprint is called sprint structure. After the start of the sprint structure is not altered, so no new features or stories are added to the sprint structure. During the sprint, we will keep check on the story status by classifying them into to do, doing, under revision, and done categories. One question may come to your mind: how do we decide the number of features to be completed in a given sprint? Friends, we will learn shortly in this video itself that it is decided by the development team, which relies on team velocity and team intuition. We have learned that a Scrum project starts with preparation of project charter. Now it is time to learn how do we start an individual sprint. Scrum Ceremonies. Scrum Methodology prescribes various team and client meetings while we complete our project. These meetings are to be conducted without fail. We call them as Scrum Ceremonies. Scrum Ceremonies are sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. We will first learn about sprint planning and then move on to other ceremonies. Starting a sprint. Every sprint starts with sprint planning. During the sprint planning, the development team decides the number of new features or stories to be delivered for a given sprint. The product owner helps the development team prioritize the stories to be taken up. The duration of a sprint can also be decided. However, it is customary to keep a uniform duration for all the sprints in a given project. The team intuition, which is the best judgment of the team, and team velocity decides the number of stories to be taken up for a sprint. We will be learning about team velocity shortly. Daily stand-up meeting or a daily scrum. A sprint starts after sprint planning. Once the sprint has started, the team gathers or huddles together for a daily meeting. This daily meeting is called a daily stand-up meeting or daily scrum. The main purpose of the daily stand-up meeting is to provide a joint opportunity to team members to review progress of the project on a daily basis. The team members report to each other and not to any single individual. The synchronization of work between various team members is also taken up during this meeting. The daily scrum is one of the scrum ceremonies. The other ceremonies are sprint review and sprint retrospective. Sprint review. A sprint review happens at the end of the sprint. The customer also participates in the sprint review. The demonstration and delivery of working software to the client is the main activity of a sprint review. The team and the client discuss the obstacles and various measures which can remove these obstacles. The client also provides his feedback to the development team during the sprint review meeting or the sprint review ceremony. Sprint retrospective. Sprint retrospective happens after the sprint review. As the name suggests, the development team retrospects about the last sprint. The client is not present in the sprint retrospective. In a sprint retrospective, the team retrospects or thinks about the last sprint. It applies root cause analysis method to situations encountered. It prioritizes remedial measures, and if required, a voting can also take place for the same. After having learned about various Scrum ceremonies, now we will learn about roles in Scrum. Three roles in Scrum. So far about Scrum, we have discussed that we start a Scrum project, by preparing a project charter. Then we take up sprint planning, followed by daily stand-up meetings. At the end of the sprint, a sprint review and a sprint retrospective are conducted. All this is accomplished by individuals working on a Scrum project. There are three defined roles in Scrum. They are product owner, a Scrum Master, and the development team. Now we will learn further about these roles. Product owner. Product owner is responsible for the product backlog. Product backlog is nothing else but the overall requirements of the project. Product owner is also responsible for project success, as the main responsibility of the product owner is the requirements of the project. Generally, someone who is well equipped with business analysis skills or the business analyst takes up this role. The client or his representative can also take up the role of the product owner. The product owner focuses the team on high priority features on every sprint. Here, I will clarify that features are nothing else but requirements of the project. Another important role on a Scrum project is that of a Scrum Master. The role of a Scrum Master is to facilitate the development team. So he is not a traditional project manager. The Scrum Master maintains the burn down chart. He conducts the sprint retrospective. One important and also routine activity of a Scrum Master is to remove impediments and obstacles faced by the development team. He protects the development team from any distractions or external interferences. To summarize, a Scrum Master's activity is to assist the team manage the Scrum framework and not the project itself. A Scrum Master acts as a coach and not as a traditional project manager to the team. Scrum Team. Now it's time to learn about yet another role on a Scrum project, which is the Scrum Team. Scrum is a variation of Agile methodology. Agile places reliance and trust on individuals working on a project. So a Scrum team or the development team is a self-organizing and a self-managing team. The team maintains the sprint backlog and conducts the sprint review. The Scrum team does not have any preset roles within itself. Artifacts of Scrum. Let us now learn about artifacts of Scrum. An artifact is a kind of side output produced during the project. The artifacts in Scrum are product backlog, sprint backlog, and burn down chart. These artifacts have received a mention earlier in video. Let's learn a little more about them. Product backlog. A product backlog is the complete catalog of product or project functional requirements. The requirements on a Scrum project are also called features or stories. The product owner maintains and manages the product backlog. A sprint backlog. Out of the total set of features or requirements which are mentioned in the product backlog, a partial set is taken up in every sprint. This partial set of features or user stories or requirements will be completed in this given sprint. This is called the sprint backlog. It is not necessary that the sprint backlog is always a subset of product backlog. This so happens because a sprint backlog may contain some sub-stories which are further elaboration of product backlog stories. A sprint artifact, a burn down chart. A burn down chart is a graphical representation of work left to do versus elapsed time. The outstanding work or backlog is shown on the vertical axis. The time elapsed is shown along the horizontal axis. That is, the burn down chart is a run chart of outstanding work. It is useful for predicting when all of the work will be completed. The burn down chart is often used in agile software development methodologies, including Scrum. However, burn down charts can be applied to any project containing measurable progress over time. The burn down chart can also be prepared for individual sprints. Here in this visual, the iteration number or the sprint number is shown along the x-axis, whereas the corresponding number of story points which are yet to be developed are shown along the y-axis. The story points, as we will learn shortly, are a way to estimate effort to develop a requirement or a functionality on a Scrum project. You can see that the total backlog of story points to be delivered increase on sprint number 6. This can be attributed to inclusion of new requirements on the project. Stories, documentation, estimation, and team velocity. Now we will learn about user stories, documentation of agile project requirements through user stories, estimation of effort on user stories, and team velocity. Documenting requirements through user stories. The requirements of an agile project are documented in form of user stories. Here I will clarify a misconception which a few people may hold about agile projects, that they need no documentation. Agile projects follow a practical approach when it comes to requirements documentation. That is, here we prepare a light requirements document and keep in close touch with the customer to ensure requirements are delivered right. Let us now learn about the structure of a user story and how we write a user story. Writing a user story. Before we start writing a user story, we should know that a user story is nothing else but a project requirement. User stories are written in a particular style, and that style is, as a user role, I want some action or some goal so that a particular benefit accrues to me. Let us learn to write a user story with some examples. Think of a requirement of a bank account holder. The bank account holder has got a net banking account through which he is able to do a funds transfer from his net banking service. Now this account holder wants to make payment of monthly electricity utility bills through his net banking facility. The user story written for this requirement will be as follows. As a bank account holder, I want to pay monthly utility bills through my net banking service so that I can make the monthly utility bill payment at any time of day and from the place of my convenience without standing in a electricity utility bill payment counter queue and without taking leave from my office. User stories and index cards. User stories are typically written on index cards which are 3 inches by 5 inches in size. At the back of the card, we write the success criteria and the method as to how we are going to test the availability of this functionality or feature in the software. Have a look at the user story index card shown at the screen. You can see at the bottom of this index card, there are 3 points which are mentioned. First one is value, second one is author, and third one is estimate. Author is basically the author who has written this user story. Estimate is basically the number of points which are assigned to this story. And then we also assign value to every story which is of use to the user or the client. Let's also learn about themes and epics. Themes and epics group user stories together. An epic delivers a large chunk of user value and it will have number of connected user stories. And epic can be analyzed on the basis of acronym feedback, where F stands for flow, E stands for effort, E stands for entry, D for data operations, B for business rules, A for alternatives, C for complexity, and K for knowledge. User role and value to the user are very important for user stories and for the epic. Agile Task Board. Agile Task Board is a visual agile tool where user stories written on index cards are pasted. For every sprint, we maintain the stories which are to be taken up for that sprint. Their status during the sprint is classified into categories like to do, in process, to verify, and done. Daily stand-up meetings are conducted by teams around agile task boards. Estimation on agile projects. Now, when we have prepared a user story, how do we estimate or calculate the effort required to develop it? Agile teams are self-organizing teams, and ultimate amount of trust is placed on it. It is the team and not the Scrum Master which calculates the estimate of the effort for a given user story or for a set of stories. Whatever the team will calculate will be the estimates and not the final commitments from the team. With this in light, let us now understand how effort estimation is done on an agile project. Every story to be developed will be assigned a certain number of points. These points reflect the effort required to develop this story. So a story which has been given 10 points will require twice the effort compared to a story which has been assigned 5 points. Scrum projects use relative estimation. This means when an Scrum team estimates effort required for a given story, the starting point is whether this story will take more or less effort than other baseline stories. Whether this story will take equal or 1.5 times effort than other story which has already been developed. If we are to arrive at the best effort estimate for a given story, planning poker method is used during sprint planning. The team members sit around a table. Individual stories are then taken up. Every team member assigns story points to the given story in an independent manner. This means he assigns these story points without consulting other team members. These points are then shared with other team members. The team members justify the points they have assigned to a given story. Finally, the team arrives at a consensus for the number of points to be assigned to a story. Team velocity. Team velocity is the average number of story points covered by the team across several sprints. It is the team velocity which decides the number of stories to be taken up in a given sprint. Summary. Allow me to summarize this session. We started this session with an intent to cover Agile software development methodology and its most popular variation, Scrum. We started with what is Agile. We discussed Agile Philosophy and Agile Manifesto. We also discussed the difference between Agile and Waterfall software development projects. We then moved on to Scrum. Here we learned what is Scrum, Scrum Ceremonies, Scrum Roles, and Scrum Artifacts. We then covered writing requirements on Scrum projects through user stories, effort estimation of a user story, and team velocity was also discussed. Friends, before I say goodbye to you, I hope you have enjoyed this video on Agile and Scrum. For an author and a teacher, no better encouragement than learners who share their happy feedback. Do share your feedback with me on director@qbi.in or at 9810055734. Goodbye. May you be among the top IT business analysts and agile practitioners in the world. Amen. Friends, thank you once again for going through this video on Agile and Scrum. I invite you to join our programs on IT business analysis, Scrum, Six Sigma, etc. Our programs can be subscribed with economy and convenience. You can join our video-based training program or a live instructor-led online program or a face-to-face program. Do contact us without any hesitation for any clarification on this. Bye.